Every day we hear about it on television, read about it in the news, speak about it with others. Yet the word globalization is interpreted differently in every situation. The year 1800 marked the beginning of what Thomas Friedman, author of The World is Flat, refers to as Globalization 2.0. Friedman additionally introduces the concept of flattening, which entitled an increased amount of individuals to accomplish their goals on a more even playing field for many industries. Throughout history, we have explored the Globalization 2.0 era from many different places and perspectives worldwide. The periods in history we have studied include situations both which hindered globalization and contributed to its progression in shrinking the world from a size medium to a size small. The initial historical period leading into this idea was the Industrial Revolution, which piqued the idea of globalization and flattening. The first major technological advancement that progressed globalization was the cotton gin. The cotton industry was quite small in the 17th century and climaxed during the mid-18th century. The first innovation in cotton manufacturing was the fly shuttle, which hastened the process of weaving cloth. This newly found innovation did not work quickly enough for the production number needed for distribution. Later that year, Eli Etney invented the cotton gin, which was able to separate the cotton plant seeds from the cotton fibers. These breakthroughs in technology made cotton improbably cheap and expandable, which caused the cotton industry to skyrocket. By the end of the 18th century, manufacture of cotton began to move out of family economy and production and into factory mills. The cotton was traded worldwide for profit and became a necessary and essential object for everyday people. This was one of the first globalized businesses, and it began the integration of national economy to international economies through trade. In addition to this advancement in globalization, it included the idea of flattening due to the fact that everyone receiving it had to pay special trade and manufacturing taxes, which made the playing field fair because everyone was paying the same tax. After studying the Industrial Revolution, we looked at the rise of nationalism and its hindrance to globalization and flattening. Nationalism was the idea that a person's loyalty should not be to a king or empire, rather to a nation of people who share a common culture and history. Nationalism forced a disunity of people who wanted to go back to the ways of the Industrial Revolution, which was the major start of globalization. Nationalism led the way in the opposite direction of globalization by discouraging foreigners, causing a lack of raw material from other countries. Overall, the rise of nationalism hindered globalization because of its want to make a society based off of a common race and nation. This discouraged trade and the process of flattening due to the fact that not all nations were equal, rather each nation tried to transcend the next. After studying the hindrance of globalization during the rise of nationalism, we explored imperialism. Imperialism simultaneously impeded and fostered the flattening and globalization of the world. Under the rule of King Leopold of Belgium, the Europeans took over India through the British East India Company. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, Britain was turned into the world's workshop, and India was a major supplier of raw materials for that workshop. The British overran India to gain profit and raw material to produce British goods. Though this operation did expedite the process of Globalization 2.0, it impeded the flattening process in India. The British restricted the Indian-owned industries and conversions to cash crops caused minimal amounts of food, resulting in famines. During this time, India's undertaking to globalize and to acquire equal opportunities in commerce was interrupted. Much of the Indian population was displaced because of the large plantation that had been established for the British, and finally, the Indians revolted. Though British rule impeded the flattening of India, It concurrently assisted with the globalization of Britain. Following imperialism, the First World War broke out in the year 1914. The war began yet another climax in globalization, the new technology of the 20th century combined with the approaches of the 19th century. Throughout the war, millions of soldiers began to make use of the telephone, wireless communications, armored cars and tanks, and aircrafts. The Germans were further ahead in terms of developments in war weapons, causing other countries to compete in science and technology. As the Germans began the development process of the atom bomb, the United States became concerned about the possibility that Germany could develop the atom bomb before the Allies. As a result, a conference was held in Quebec, and the Allies decided they needed to impede the German nuclear program. Germany had surrendered the war by the time the atom bomb was ready for use, and it was launched in Japan on Hiroshima. A few days later, Japan had still not surrendered, and a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Soon after, the Japanese surrendered the war, and World War I was over. This is an example of a power struggle, a common occurrence in the process of globalization. Enemies in the war had the same demand for weapons and unknowingly assisted one another in the development of the atom bomb. Additionally, the situation displayed the power struggle in terms of leveling the playing field for the competitors in the sciences. Both the United States and Germany had equal opportunities for developing the bomb, and both countries competed on a level scientific field. Though World War I was a negative occurrence, the advances in technology have assisted both to globalize and flatten the world. Following World War I, the interwar period was indicated by radical changes in international conduct and away from balancing powers. One establishment that brought radical changes to global conduct was the League of Nations. The League of Nations was an intergovernmental organization instituted to promote and maintain peace and world security, while encouraging economic progression between countries. Additionally, the League of Nations was founded to promote globalization due to the fact that its Treaty of Conditions included things that were global, that brought together the world under one covenant. Ideally, the primary goals were to prevent war through mutual security, demilitarize, to settle international disputes through negotiation and arbitration. The notion behind the League of Nations illustrates the underlying shift in society from the past and encourages new developments which contributed to Globalization 2.0. Though the interwar period displayed acts of progressing worldwide communications, it also hindered global commerce because of the hyperinflation in Germany. Subsequent to the war, the Germans were forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, under which they had to pay reparation payments to the Allied powers. The Germans were in an increased amount of debt because of the war, and the central bank, the Reichsbank, began to print an unlimited amount of money to pay back the ever-increasing war expenditures. The economy began to fall, and this began the citizens' want for higher wages, meaning higher costs of production goods. This hindered economic globalization due to the fact that production and distribution rates were so high, foreign investment and trade had declined. The path to another war was on its way, and in 1939, the Second World War followed. Unfortunately, globalization was a negative entity during this war, though it did occur. Hitler was able to invade and take over a majority of the European countries and cause many controversial effects. Many countries were involved, declaring war on one another and attempting to ally themselves with countries that could assist them. This is an example of the spread of militaristic and political globalization that occurred. In addition to the negative globalization, the Second World War was the cause of a hindrance of a societal globalization, or more specifically, anti-Semitism. This also unleveled the playing field and flattening process because the Jews were looked down upon and many European countries were taken over by the Nazis and stripped of equal opportunities for progress. Under Hitler's regime, along with denationalizing countries, he encouraged anti-Semitism among his followers. There was a Jewish question which arose in the politics of the Nazis, which Hitler emphasized and took immediate action. Today, the mass genocide is referred to as the Holocaust, or in Hebrew, the Shoah. The Jews were singled out and were perceived as the other. Hitler encouraged this through propaganda and dehumanized the Jewish people. The Holocaust obstructed the Jewish people, therefore hindering societal and ethical globalization. During this time, societies and cultures were not able to integrate in any manner, causing a break in the unity of the world. Following World War II and the Holocaust came the Cold War and decolonization. The Cold War was a continuation of economic competition between the Soviet Union and the United States. This conflict went worldwide as nationalist movements were being established in third world countries, which previously were allied with the communists. The Soviet Union, which was communist at the time, was angered by the fact that these countries had decolonized and were nationalizing under the influence of the United States. Because many of the countries with goods and raw materials were becoming nationalized and decolonized, industrialization was delayed, and many international economies were unstable as a result. The Soviet Union suffered economic stagnation and later collapsed, which left the United States as the dominant military power. On the whole, the Cold War introduced a major pause in industrial development worldwide due to the lack of raw materials from newly decolonized countries. Subsequent to the Cold War, the emphasis was across the world, which focused on the development and evolution of Palestine to Israel. The establishment of Israel is an ideal example of globalization in view of society, ethnicity, and culture. For many years, the Jewish people had fought for that homeland that was promised to them in the Holy Torah, and this seemed like the perfect time. In the years prior to World War II and the Holocaust, the need for a Jewish homeland increased. In 1947, the United Nations proposed the partition plan, which included both a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jewish people agreed to this plan out of their desperateness for a unified country. On May 14, 1948, it was announced that there would be a newfound Jewish homeland called Israel, named after the biblical figure Yaakov, whose name was changed to Israel by God. The State of Israel exemplifies the integration of culture and ethnicity into politics and military. The development of Israel encouraged countries to communicate and make a decision based on a majority. This conveys globalization through integration of cultures and countries communicating to make one decision. Throughout the study of all these events, one can clearly see the periods where Globalization 2.0 has been at a climax and where it has fallen. From the Industrial Revolution to the establishment of the State of Israel, the world has been through many wars and disputes, yet nevertheless, Friedman's idea of Globalization 2.0 was able to progress, leading into the next era of globalization. In addition to the globalization of the world shrank through flattening from medium to small. These events have encouraged communication worldwide and led to freedom and equal opportunities for competing people and industries. Though there were many situations where globalization and flattening fell through, it continues to shape the world today.